Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, or good night. I'm Andra, and now you are listening to my voice, reading you a short summary of a book called The Five People You Meet in Heaven. So, the novel begins with a countdown to the death of Eddie, a crippled elderly man who works in maintenance at Ruby Pierre, a seaside amusement park. Eddie has always wanted to leave Ruby Pierre to make a life for himself elsewhere, but has never been able to. While making his ordinary rounds one day, Eddie sees a cart on the right called Freddy's Free Fall, hanging and threatening to dump out the ride-goers. Eddie quickly helps other workers to get the people out, but then he notices that the cart is still falling, while a little girl, Amy, stands below. Eddie goes to save her and dies when the cart falls on him. Eddie goes to heaven, where he travels through many shifting colors until he meets the Blue Man, who was one of the circus freaks at Ruby Pier long ago. The Blue Man tells Eddie that in heaven he will meet 5 important people who will each teach him a lesson about his life. The Blue Man explains that he turned blue as a child from medical silver nitrate and led a lonely life thereafter. He explains that he died because of Eddie. When Eddie was a child, he once ran into the road after a lost ball. And the Blue Man had a heart attack after swerving to avoid hitting him by a car. The Blue Man teaches Eddie the lesson of human connection, that all lives are connected, even those of strangers. Eddie then travels again through the colors, and then arrives in a familiar jungle battleground. There he meets the captain. The novel flashes back to Eddie's youth, while he decided to enlist in World War II to prove his bravery. Stationed in the Philippines, Eddie and his units are taken captive by the enemy. Months later, they plan and execute an escape. While setting the village on fire, Eddie thinks he sees small shadows moving in one of the huts and tries to save the person. He is then shot in the leg and knocked unconscious. He comes home permanently crippled and bitter. In heaven, the captain reveals that it was he who shot Eddie, trying to get him out of the fire. He also reveals that he died during the escape while trying to get his men out. Before leaving him, the captain teaches Eddie that sacrifice is vital to life and should be sought after rather than lamented. Eddie travels again and lands outside of a dinner in the mountains, where he sees his father in the window. The novel flashes back to Eddie's childhood, during which he grows up trying to win the love of his physically abusive, emotionally neglectful father. In heaven, a woman named Ruby appears and tells Eddie that her husband Emil built Ruby Pier in her honor long ago. The first Ruby Pier burned down, ruining Emil's spirit and wealth. Emil was then in the hospital next to Eddie's father, who was dying. Ruby explains that Eddie's father died saving his friend Mickey Shea from drowning in an ocean storm, even though he had just caught Mickey trying to rape Eddie's mother. Ruby teaches Eddie the lesson of forgiveness, and Eddie lets go of his anger towards his father. Next, Eddie finds himself in a world of weddings, where he finds his wife, Margaret. The novel flashes back to Eddie's life with Margaret from the courtship at Ruby Pierre, to their humble wedding, to their attempts to have children. Eddie ruined their chances of adopting a child after Margaret got into a devastating car accident while trying to stop Eddie from gambling away all their money on his birthday. Margaret eventually forgave him, but soon afterwards she died from a brain tumor. Eddie is left feeling empty, as Margaret had always been the primary source of his happiness in life, and she had given him the strength to fight through the darkness that consumed him after the war. In heaven, Margaret spends a long time with Eddie. She teaches him that love transcends death. The novel flashes back through Eddie's birthdays after Margaret dies, all of which are lonely and uneventful. Eddie spends his last years missing Margaret and regretting that he never left Ruby Pierre to make a life for himself elsewhere. He believed that his life was meaningless. In heaven, the last person Eddie meets is a little girl named Tala. She reveals that she was killed at Eddie's hands during the war. She was the small shadow Eddie saw moving in the flaming hut. Eddie falls into a deep despair, now believing that he deserved all the darkness he felt all of his life. Tala then explains to Eddie that he redeemed himself by keeping children safe through his maintenance job at Ruby Pierre. Eddie finds peace and travels through heaven until he reaches a Ferris wheel in the sky where Margaret awaits him. And that's all I can tell you about this book. I hope you enjoy it, and thank you.